Other guys that I like that you can buy low on that have struggled, Mike Evans, Michael Pittman, and Terry McLaurin are all ones on their team. Guys that you could pick up that I think would be good value just because they're going to have some more target involvement as the season goes along.
Mayfield looking left, rolling left. It's Evans, touchdown, Tampa. Fakes the give to Taylor. Richardson steps up, protecting, dangerous pass. It's caught. Michael Pittman with a snatch. They're down at 7. This one is launched from McLaurin. He's got it. Touchdown. Touchdown, Terry McLaurin.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we're going to look ahead to week 5. We're going to talk guys that you can pick up on waivers, guys you can drop, buy low candidates, and sell high candidates heading into week 5. If you're interested in more content like this, please subscribe to my channel, like this video, drop a comment. I reply to all comments on my channel. I love helping fans with fantasy football advice. So please take advantage of this in a small channel, and I'm happy to help do what I can to help you win a championship this season. And please check out my other content as well. You can see that in the description below. We are going to go through all the positions like we have before. We're going to go quarterbacks, pickups, drops, buy and sell candidates at the quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, and then we'll touch defense and kicker a little bit at the end. But before we go into that, believe it or not, we're already on our bye weeks. We have 4 teams that are going to be on a bye this next week. We've got the Detroit Lions, Los Angeles Chargers, Philadelphia Eagles, and Tennessee Titans. So I'm going to do a segment called Buy or Buy. And this is going to basically be saying, do you want to try to trade for these players on their bye, or do you want to drop them? So I'm going to go through some of these players that you may have question marks on these teams with what you want to do for all 4 of these teams. And then we'll get into what we do at some of these other positions. So, buy or buy. All right. So for the Detroit Lions, Jared Goff, this is going to be a buy for me. If you happen to have him rostered in 1 quarterback leagues, I would really be shocked. But if he's in 2 quarterback leagues, I think that you could drop him on his bye week if you need to get some other options depending on the size of your league. All right. The running back core, Rhythm and Bruise. We've got Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. These are buy candidates for me on their bye week. These guys are both struggling relatively to start the season compared to what we may expect. They're both giving you consistent value, but nothing elite right now. But I do think that the elite performances will come for both of them. And I think that coming out of this bye week, this is a good opportunity to take advantage of owners that may not want to hold on to them, need some points, and get them on your roster. And I'll be talking that in later in this video with some of our running back sell high candidates. All right. Wide receivers, Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams. If you can buy Amon-Ra St. Brown, of course you can. I highly doubt anybody would want to sell him. And then Jameson Williams, I think this is more of a hold. You don't want to buy him or drop him on his bye week by any means. But definitely don't want to, I wouldn't recommend trying to buy him just because he has his bye week, for example. Sam Laporta, this is a buy candidate for me on his bye week. Tight ends are struggling right now. People may be impatient with Sam Laporta, but if you could stash him on your bench and just hold on with another tight end option for week 5, Laporta could really be a steal for you. This is a good opportunity to take advantage of that. Los Angeles Chargers, Justin Herbert. This is going to be a buy. Again, similar to Goff, he's not really doing great this season, so you don't really need to hold him through his bye week. J.K. Dobbins, good buy candidate for me on his bye week. Struggled the last 2 games, but he has played the Steelers and the Chiefs, which are both 2 good run defenses. Now he is getting, after his bye week, the schedule lightens up a little bit for him, and I think that there's going to be some return of some of his value. I think that we have to look at him a little bit less now than we did those first 2 weeks of the season, but he's still somebody that I think could be good value for you, and this could be a good opportunity to get him when he's on his bye week. Gus Edwards is a buy. Don't need to hold on to him through his bye week if you need another running back out there. All right, for the receivers, Ladd McConkey is going to be a buy. Really like what I saw from him today, getting involved in this offense. There's not a lot of upside with the wide receiver 1 on this Chargers team, but I think if you need to hold on to any of them, I would hold on to McConkey. In deep leagues, I would hold on to Quentin Johnson, but if you're in a shallow league, 10 team or less, you could say bye-bye to Quentin Johnson. No need to hold on to him through his bye week. And then Josh Palmer, bye-bye as well. All right, Philadelphia Eagles, Jalen Hurts. This is going to be a bye for me. Jalen Hurts has struggled this season. I've talked about how I love Jalen Hurts as a quarterback in fantasy football. Struggling so far to start the season, but I do feel confident that he will get better as the season goes along. This is a good opportunity to try to buy him, especially if you have two quarterbacks and you need to flip one, and you think you could flip one of them to get Jalen Hurts. Then you could start that other quarterback on Hurts bye, and then you could put Hurts back in week 6. This is a good opportunity to try to take advantage of that off some disappointing games from Jalen Hurts. If anybody sells you Saquon Barkley, of course, take it, but I doubt anybody's going to be selling the RB1 on the season right now to you. So, yeah. And A.J. Brown, another great buy candidate on his bye week. Same with Devonta Smith as well to an extent. But for A.J. Brown especially, definitely want to buy him. This is a good time. I think he'll be coming off an injury. Owners may be impatient with him right now with his injury status. So good chance to try to take advantage of buying A.J. Brown. And then maybe controversial, but Dallas Goedert to me is a bye-bye. You do not need to hold on to him through his bye week. And I believe that when A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith come back, you will be seeing poor performances from Dallas Goedert. All right, Tennessee Titans. Will Levis is a bye-bye. Not that anybody really had him rostered anyway, unless you're in really deep leagues. Running backs. You want to buy Tony Pollard, in my opinion. And depending on the size of your league, I think that Tajay Spears is a buy candidate as well. I'm not actively looking to drop either of these guys if I don't have to. Shallow leagues, I think you can drop Spears, but I do like him as a buy candidate in very deep leagues because ultimately I do see a world where Spears starts getting more involved in this backfield as a team that doesn't really look like they're going to be competing in 2024. Wide receivers, so buy Calvin Ridley in my opinion. I'm not crazy about his upside, but I do feel that he is the wide receiver 1 on this team, and you could get him at a pretty cheap value, especially if he doesn't play well tomorrow night. But for DeAndre Hopkins and below, these are bye-bye. Don't need to hold them through their bye week. And then Chigakonkwo, bye-bye. And then for all these teams, defense and kicker, bye-bye. That includes Jake Elliott. That includes Cameron Dicker. Yeah, you don't need to hold these guys through their bye week, and none of these defenses are really standout defenses right now anyway that you need to roster them. All right, so now we will get into the quarterback position, and we're going to start first with the guys that you want to pick up on waivers from quarterbacks. So first of all, check in your leagues to see if Sam Darnold and Caleb Williams are out there. Currently, Sam Darnold is still only 43% in ESPN, 43% rostered in ESPN leagues, which is crazy because he's the QB6, I believe, right now on the season. Just playing incredible. He's got to definitely be in the conversation for a top 12 quarterback that you lock in as a starter. Not sure if I would want to lock him in every week necessarily right now, but he's definitely earned a spot to be rostered in the majority of leagues. And another guy, Caleb Williams, I've talked about him last week, so I won't go into it too much today, but really like the upside that I'm seeing in him starting to develop as a quarterback, getting more reps and getting the ball down the field more. He's still struggling, and he's not really progressing at the rate that Jalen Daniels is, so there's going to always be that comparison. But I'm not worried about Caleb Williams. I think that he will be fine as the season goes along, and he's a great stash candidate with a lot of potential. All right, so the other guys that you want to try to pick up, the big name from this week, who's only 33.9% rostered in ESPN leagues, Justin Fields. And this is more of the type of performances that we saw from the Chicago Bears that we want to see from him in this Pittsburgh team. First of all, 312 in the air, one passing touchdown. He did fumble it, but he also had 10 rushes for 55 yards and 2 touchdowns, so a total of 31.98. Number 1 QB on the week. And this is why Fields' potential is so tantalizing in fantasy football, is because he can do stuff like this where he just goes off and he's a cheat code. And, there's questions, though, with how long he's going to be holding that starting position. But for me personally, he hasn't done anything to lose it. And I think clearly he has more long-term upside to this team than Russell Wilson does at this point. So I think they're just going to continue to ride it out with Fields. And if he's out there, he's a must roster, because if he keeps putting up games like he did today, he can win you a championship. So this is a guy that I would definitely try to get on my team. In 2 QB leagues, he definitely needs to be rostered. I would drop probably 25+% of fab to get him, maybe 25 to 50, depending on how desperate you are at quarterback in 2 QB leagues. And for smaller leagues, I would still try to get him on my roster, make sure he's at least stashed on the bench. Other guys, Andy Dalton still had a decent game today. Not great, but it wasn't a great QB week in general. He was still top 12. This team is going to be behind a lot. They're going to be passing a lot. He's got good rapport with Deontay Johnson, starting to get Xavier Legette, who I'm going to talk about a little bit, involved as well. So I think Dalton is going to be of good value for you throughout the season. And I definitely make sure that he gets rostered in 2 QB leagues as well. He's only 8.8% rostered in ESPN, which is crazy. And then another deep league guy to keep an eye on. I would make sure that Joe Flacco is rostered if you're in deep leagues with 2 quarterbacks, because Anthony Richardson, as he showed you today, wildly inconsistent this season and oft injured. So now he's dealing with another injury to his hip. They say that he's going to come back this next week, but I would make sure if you're in deep leagues that you have Joe Flacco rostered, because as you saw today, once Joe Flacco got in there, the offense opened up, and we saw more of Michael Pittman, Josh Downs, guys that we weren't really seeing consistent production with when Richardson was the quarterback. Not a spectacular game necessarily by Flacco. He was 16 for 26, 168 and 2. But this team is he just has so much more passing capabilities in a traditional offense with Flacco. Obviously, Richardson has tons of potential, but if this thing doesn't get better for Indianapolis, they may just decide to pull the plug and put Flacco in, or if Richardson gets injured. So I would make sure he's rostered in all leagues as a option that could be a good lottery ticket for you. Guys that you want to drop at quarterback. So it's looking like Matt Stafford, if he's rostered, I think you could safely send him to the bench without hesitation. This offense is really struggling in terms of the passing game without Kupp and Nakua, and unfortunately Stafford just doesn't have the guys that can hold the offense up and give him a good stat line. He's droppable to me. As I mentioned last week, Kirk Cousins is droppable. Another poor performance today. He only had 7.5 fantasy points, 238 and 1 interception, no touchdowns. I think there's just better options out there than Kirk that you can pursue in fantasy. And then this is another take. If you're in shallow leagues, I think you can drop Derek Carr depending on the situation. Next week they get Kansas City. Probably going to be another rough game. They did have some offensive line injuries early against Philadelphia, and since that, this team has really there's been almost a 180 in a way between the offense in week 1 and 2 versus these past 2 weeks. So yeah, I think if you're desperate, I think you can cut Derek Carr, get some of these other options that I talked about. I'd rather have Fields than Derek Carr right now. Who are the guys that you want to buy? I already talked about Jalen Hurts earlier, so not going to really touch on him here, but quarterbacks that I like that you could buy. How about Joe Burrow? Joe Burrow has been pretty good for the last 2 weeks. He struggled to start the season, but now that Higgins is back, you can see the offense starting to open up. And now they have an interesting 2 running back tandem that is helping their team too. He didn't have a great stat line today necessarily, 232, 2 and 1 touchdown interception, a total of 16.2 fantasy points. But keep in mind that Bengals got out pretty early in this game and didn't really need to use Burrow as much as they would in some of these other situations. Next week they're playing Baltimore, and you're definitely going to see more of this passing game from Joe Burrow. He's also got some nice matchups the next 2 weeks. He's got the Giants in week 6, and then he's got the Browns, which is tough, but then Philadelphia and Las Vegas. So I like this little stretch coming up for Joe Burrow. This is a good opportunity to buy low on him. Other guys I like that you could buy low on, Brock Purdy. And then in a similar situation, they're getting all their pieces back, and Purdy is, except for McCaffrey, of course, but the receivers are all coming back to the fold. And Purdy is a guy that he gives you consistent fantasy value. He's reliable enough, but he doesn't come with a huge name value of an elite fantasy quarterback. So he's a good underrated guy that you could pick up who will be serviceable for you, and really like him as well as somebody that you could get onto your roster. And then Kyler Murray, another great buy low candidate for me. He has struggled the last 2 weeks, and not a great stat line overall through the season. 14, 28, 14, and 9. So, and he does have a tough matchup coming up against San Francisco, but the schedule does get better for him, and I especially like his playoff schedule. Week 16 and 17, he gets Carolina and the Los Angeles Rams. So if you're willing to put up with what could be a tough week 5 and then maybe a tough week 7 against the Los Angeles Chargers, he does have a good second half stretch to close the season, and I do like Kyler Murray as a buy low candidate. Guys that you could sell high on. Baker Mayfield is playing great, but I am still skeptical that he is going to be a top 5 quarterback through the season. He's currently coming into this week. He was the QB 7, and I believe after this performance today, he should be top 5. I don't feel that it's going to stay that way. So you could flip Baker Mayfield to get a Jalen Hurts at the same game. I would recommend doing that personally. The rushing value is immensely helpful in fantasy football, as I've talked about before. Same kind of concept with Sam Darnold. Again, great story, playing well, but I really am not confident that he's going to hold a top 5 position as a quarterback in fantasy football. So I would recommend personally trying to use this as an opportunity to flip him for a guy that I project will stay in the top 5 consistently with rush value. Another big name that I would sell, and not that he's playing great, and I've talked about this multiple times on this. He's been a weekly segment in my sell high candidates among quarterbacks, is Patrick Mahomes. I think we just have to get to the point that this guy is not a good fantasy football player. He, of course, as I've said, he's a great quarterback, but he has not put up great numbers this season. He did not put up good numbers last season, and now Rashee Rice is probably out for the season. So the upside is extremely limited with him. He comes with name brand value that I'm sure people will still want to buy him despite how he's playing. I mean, heck, he was still getting drafted as number 1 quarterback in a lot of these leagues to start the season despite how he played last year. But he gets New Orleans next week. Then he has a bye week, and then he plays San Francisco. This is just not going to go well for you if you keep trusting Mahomes. I would try to get him off your roster. I think any of these guys that I had talked about before as pickups would probably be better to play than Patrick Mahomes right now, which is crazy to think, but the reality is that you can't have this guy as your starting quarterback right now. All right, so we will move to the running backs. A lot of good pickups this week on for the running back position. I want to start first with guys that are probably rostered but may still be out there. Chase Brown. So for Chase Brown, disappointing start to the season, but what I really like about him is that he is more explosive than Zach Moss. He is a great pass catcher, and you have seen more progress over the last few weeks of him getting involved more. So Moss had a great game today, but Chase Brown to me is the Bengal that you want to hold through the season. Just look at the carries through the first 4 weeks. He started with 3, got 11 yards, 4 for 31 the next game. Then he was 7 for 62, and this week is 15 for 80. So at every game, he's been over 3.5 average. He's been over 5 the last 3 games. He got 2 touchdowns today. Zach Moss has looked great as well, but I do think that this backfield is starting to turn to Chase Brown. And if he is out there on waivers, this is my number 1 grab. Drop your fab. Make sure that you get him on your team, because I think that this is going to be the guy in Cincinnati in this backfield to conclude the season, and he could be a league winner. Other guys that I like that had good weeks, my number 2 that I would try to get is Rico Dowdle. He did get a touchdown on Thursday that did help his numbers, but I do think there's just so much upside in this Dallas offense. Unless they pick up somebody like Leonard Fournette or get somebody at the trade deadline, I don't think that there's a real path for somebody else to get ahead of Dowdle. He's clearly the most talented running back in that room. So this is, to me, a lot of upside there, and I think they're starting to notice that and get him involved too. So after Brown, I would go for Rico Dowdle. And then other names to keep an eye on that I do like, and I'll kind of run through these quickly. Jeremy McNichols had a good game today, and I think as long as Eckler is still out, the Commanders are going to use 2 running backs and have a scheme where Jaden Daniels has the opportunity to run it with both of these running backs. They're running a 2 running back by committee right now, and it's working well for them. And I think if Eckler stays out, then McNichols is going to be interesting as a deep league flex option. Trey Sermon. So Jonathan Taylor got banged up at the end of that game, and I do think that Taylor will be fine to play week 5, but keep an eye on Trey Sermon. Make sure that he's rostered in case Taylor is not good to go. Bucky Irving, another good game today. He is showing to be more efficient than Rachaad White, and I think that they still have a lot of faith in Rachaad White, that they're not going to necessarily turn the keys over completely to Irving, but he's somebody that you want to make sure is rostered, that's still widely available. That he's only 51% rostered in ESPN leagues, so you got to make sure that he is on your team if he is out there. And then other guys, deep leagues, Tank Bigsby, very similar situation. ETN was banged up. Bigsby looked good today. Make sure that he is rostered. Ogunbowale. So we thought that Cam Akers would step into a good opportunity today with the 2 running backs ahead of him out, Mixon and Pierce. But it was Ogunbowale that did, which kind of shows you how little faith they have in Cam Akers. But if that the same situation happened next week, I think Ogunbowale would be a good pickup. Kareem Hunt, Kansas City. I'm not a big fan of this Kansas City backfield situation right now, but if you have to go with any of them, I would go with Kareem Hunt. And then Roschon Johnson. It went back to Swift today. He had a great game, but Roschon Johnson is looking like he could be the good handcuff to Swift, and he gets injured. Potential lottery ticket there. Running backs, there's not a lot of situations where you want to drop a running back, but I think that Cam Akers has shown that you cannot roster him. Even if he gets the starting nod again, I would not go there again. And then the Denver running backs, I think if you need to get rid of them, I would not have a problem with getting rid of any of them, because I think that this is a very limited offense, and they're running a committee that seems to kill the value of any of these guys. Buy candidates among the running backs. I'm going to start with 2 guys that are in the top tier for me, Bijan Robinson and Breece Hall. And they're both kind of in similar situations where they're highly drafted running backs, have not played well, and they're kind of in this weird timeshare situation with their backups, Braylon Allen and Tyler Algier. I almost called him Trey Algier, but they're both kind of limiting their upside, and I think that the managers of these 2 may be kind of panicking right now, but I do feel that both of them will be fine as the season goes along. I'm not worried about them, and this is a good chance to try to buy them from those managers. Another guy that I like that you could buy among the running back position is Josh Jacobs. Struggled today, but you do have to take into context that this Green Bay team, one, they've been without Jordan Love the past 2 weeks, week 2 and 3. And then in week 4, they were down the majority of this game. So they didn't really have an opportunity to use Josh Jacobs as they would like to. But when Jacobs played in week 1, he was excellent. I think that, when Jordan Love played, Josh Jacobs was excellent. And I think this Green Bay team looks like they're going to be good. So as the season goes along, there's going to be some good opportunities for Josh Jacobs. And this is a good chance to try to buy him. And 2 other guys that I like that are probably cheaper that you can get. James Conner didn't have a great game today, but he's clearly the 1A in Arizona. And I think that they are going to be in position where, I've already mentioned Kyler Murray had the playoff schedule. Same applies to James Conner. So he's got a tough game next week against San Francisco, but I do think that he's got a lot of upside as the lead running back on this team that really doesn't get the notoriety of some of these other running backs that are number 1s on their team. And then Jerome Ford, very similar situation, but he is now clearly the running back over Deonta Foreman on this team, and he had 7 receptions today. So as Deshaun Watson continues to struggle, I think they're going to keep dunking it down to Jerome Ford, and he will be an effective PPR running back. They get Washington next week. I do like that upside for him there. Guys that you want to sell. So a lot of the top performing running backs today are good sell candidates, in my opinion. Looking at this, Derrick Henry is he just going off today? 34 points. Goodness gracious. But DeAndre Swift, the second performing running back, this is a good sell candidate to me because he struggled the first few weeks, but he's had a good week this week. I would bet that he would not put up a performance like today again, and this is a good chance to try to sell him. Other guys that I would try to sell, so Chuba Hubbard, Jonathan Brooks is coming back. Chuba has now put in 2 very good games these past 2 weeks, and I do like him if you can hold on to him, but this is a good opportunity to capitalize on 2 great weeks with Andy Dalton. And before Jonathan Brooks comes back, try to get what you can for Chuba Hubbard. In my opinion, this would be a good move. Make sure you're getting good value in return, though, because I do like Chuba as somebody that you can hold on to through the season if needed. And then Zach Moss, as I've talked about, Chase Brown to me is the running back at Cincinnati. And if you could sell Zach Moss off of some good performances this season, I would do that because Brown does look more explosive. Moss is benefiting from some touchdowns, though, that I think is going to regress as the season goes along. And then Rhamondre Stevenson, not by any means a sell high, but he had a good first game, and a lot of people stick to that first impression, kind of like, when you're in a job interview and stuff like that. But I think the reality of it is that this guy is going to be a cockroach on your team that you're gonna always feel like you can start him because he's the featured running back on this Patriots team. He gets a lot of touches, but this team is just perpetually going to be losing. I would honestly wouldn't be surprised if they go like 3-14 or something to that effect. 21 points the first week, 17, and then 0.3 and 8.2. This is a perfect opportunity to try to sell him. I see a lot of L's in this team's future, and I would try to get Rhamondre off your team. And then a guy that I would hold, and you can see my video that I most recently made heading into week 4, Jordan Mason, because Jordan Mason right now, you do not want to sell him off the fear that he's not going to hold the running back field down in San Francisco. I think now Jordan Mason has played well enough that you have to command an RB1 from another person who wants to get in on Jordan Mason, especially from that Christian McCaffrey manager, because they don't have any other options right now as they're waiting for McCaffrey. It's looking like he's not going to come back to November. We'll see how that develops over time. But for Jordan Mason's owners, you want to hold him, in my opinion. Wide receivers. So some good wide receivers to pick up this week that I like. My favorite one on this week that you can get is Xavier Legette. So Xavier Legette, 6 for 66 and a touchdown today, but he had a lot of balls thrown at him that he either dropped or it was short-armed and skipped it to him because of pressure. But I think that Xavier Legette, as he gets more comfortable, is going to get more involved in this offense. And like I said with Andy Dalton, they're going to be throwing. They're going to be down a lot. I think he showed a lot of great promise today, and I would make him my number 1 receiver pickup. 2 other guys that I like Dontavian Wicks. Had a good game today, 5 for 78 and 2 touchdowns. Christian Watson is going to be out for what looks to be a couple weeks. So another great pickup. I'm just a little more concerned about him having the role on this team with Romeo Doubs, Jayden Reed, Tucker Kraft there. It's just a little more concern there. Josh Downs, similar. He had a great game, 8 for 82 and 1. But again, what's it going to be like when Anthony Richardson comes back? So those are my top 3 receivers in that order. 2 other guys that I like that you could pick up that are both sneaky ads that you probably don't have to put a lot of fab on. Trey Tucker, again, because, Devontae Adams did not play this week, and Trey Tucker, not well known. I think you can get him for a pretty cheap value. And how about Olamide Zaccheaus of the Washington Commanders? So his stat line today, I believe, was also about 6 for 62. And I think we have to start looking at this Washington team now as a elite offense. Got 42 points today. They got 38, I think, against the Bengals. I have to double check that score. But it was 6 for 85, so even better than I initially said. But this was second on the team in targets. So yeah, I think there's a role in PPR for him that he could be a great sneaky ad. I'm sure would not have to put any fab to get him. And when this team is in positions where they're going to be passing more, we could see more of Zacchaeus in their offense. Other guys that I do like as well. So for this Rams situation, it's pretty ugly, but Josiah Whittington kind of stood out from the other guys today. He had 6 for 62. And I talked about earlier how, he's a slot receiver. He kind of fits that mold of Cooper Kupp. He could be the guy that they rely upon more. And you saw that today. Like he significantly outpaced Demarcus Robinson and Tutu Atwell in terms of targets. And I think he would be a good pickup if you're in deep leagues. Drop candidates, Demarcus Robinson, as I just mentioned, didn't have a good game today, and I think that it's going to be unreliable for him throughout the season, especially when Kupp and Nacua come back. And then other guys that had some good performances, and I'll go through this quickly, that I think you can move on from. Brandon Cooks, Jalen Naylor struggled today. Iosivas, the Cincinnati Bengals, Michael Wilson, and Demario Douglas. Those are all guys that showed some promise, flash in the pans, but I think if you need to look elsewhere, I would recommend doing so. I would still hold Jalen Tolbert, though, personally, because I do think that he has a lot of upside with the Cowboys that I would want to hold on to. Buy candidates among the wide receivers. So my number one buy candidate among the wide receivers is Drake London. Drake London today didn't have a great game necessarily, but he is getting targets on this team, and he's significantly getting more targets than the other receivers. Last 3 weeks, he's had 7 targets, 9 targets, and 12 targets, and he's put up, in PPR formats, 6 receptions in each of those games, 17, 18, and 12 fantasy points. So he's getting involvement on this team, developing rapport with Kirk Cousins, and is significantly outpacing the other teammates. So I think Drake London is a good buy candidate to get. They get Tampa Bay next week, which should be a better matchup for them, and then they get Carolina after that. So I do see some better games coming up for him, and I think this is a good opportunity to try to buy low on him before he potentially goes off in these next 2 games. Tyreek Hill as well, we'll see what happens, but as we saw with CeeDee Lamb and Jamar Chase, these elite receivers, they're not going to stay in these ruts for long, and if you could buy Tyreek Hill, I would recommend doing that, even depending on how this game goes tomorrow. I would still recommend trying to get Hill on your team if you can. The 2 San Francisco receivers, Deebo Samuel and Ayuk, who I both talked about before earlier, these are also good buy candidates to me. I think that they will both put some better performances up. I know Ayuk is frustrating for those managers that have him, but I do think it is going to get better, and I'm not really concerned about that right now. We'll see how this develops over the next week or 2, but right now I'm still not really worried about Ayuk. I think it's going to come there eventually. Michael Pittman, I mentioned him as a buy candidate. Be harder to buy him now, but he is a good receiver, and I think they're going to work to get him more involved. And this game is hopefully the start to that. Over 100 yards today, no touchdowns, but this is a good chance to try to buy him. And then another guy to keep an eye on. This is not a buy candidate after he did, or a buy low candidate after he did today, but Brian Thomas, because we talk about these guys that I mentioned, like Pittman, who are, number ones on their team, but don't really get the recognition of that. Brian Thomas is starting to emerge as the number 1 on this team. And the performance that he had today, he had 6 receptions, 86 yards, a touchdown on 9 targets. They're getting him more involved as well. The last 2 weeks, he's had 9 targets. And I think that this is a guy that is going to be a consistent fantasy football player. He could be a wide receiver too rest of the season. So I would try to get him on your team. A lot of people may just think this game is a fluke, but I personally think it's going to continue to get better from here. I would try to get Brian Thomas on your team. Other guys I would try to buy, Xavier Worthy. This is a cheaper buy, but I think with the absence of Rashee Rice now for a while, there could be more opportunities for Worthy moving forward that I like getting him. Sell candidates. Malik Neighbors, number 1 receiver in fantasy. And as I said earlier, I think that just because he's a rookie and because he's looking great so far, but I think if you could get those guys like the CeeDee Lambs, like the Tyreek Hills for Neighbors, I would definitely do that. Jawan Jennings, he had an okay game today. It wasn't necessarily great by the standards of what he had last week, but getting over 10 fantasy points or in the game today. 3 for 88 off 6 targets. He had a really long catch that kind of inflated those numbers. But I think that as the order starts to reset itself, Ayuk starts to get out of whatever funk he has going on right now. This is a good opportunity to sell Jennings off of that 46-point game. Just, good chance to try to sell him, because for me personally, I think that more than likely you're going to see more of these 11-point games that you saw today. And other guys I would try to sell, Rashid Shaheed redeemed himself today, but I do feel that this is, again, a very volatile player that you are not going to be able to rely upon regularly in fantasy. So what I would do is try to sell this game of Rashid Shaheed. 8 for 83 at 11 targets, which is his best target count by far. But just putting up that goose egg earlier, I think that you can get a guy that will be more consistent than Shaheed, and I would recommend trying to do that personally. And then Rhamondre struggled today, so it's not really selling high. But I think that when you get back to the 3 receivers there, Keenan Allen, DJ Moore, Rhamondre, Odunze is going to be the odd man out. So I would recommend trying to sell him. Tight ends. So the tight end landscape is rough this year, as I talked about in my last video. But some guys that did well today that are interesting to me, Tucker Kraft for the Green Bay Packers, 6 for 93 and 1 on 9 targets. That's a great performance today. But my number one that I like that you could get on waivers is Pat Freiermuth. He was 5 for 57 and 1, but he had 7 targets. And to me, among the Pittsburgh Steelers, I think there's a better chance that Freiermuth emerges as a top 2 receiving option for Justin Fields. One is Pickens, and I think it's Pickens by a long shot, but Freiermuth as that tight end, he could be the second best receiving option on this team. And I would rather go with that than Kraft, who right now it's still ambiguous whether it's him or Musgrave as the best tight end in Green Bay. And then you got all those receivers that have been talked about. I would chase Freiermuth personally among the tight ends. But other good guys to keep an eye on as well that are decent options are Cade Otton. He had a good game today, and you like his target count as well. So that's somebody to keep an eye on. And then Zach Ertz, another guy that I've mentioned earlier, getting some good involvement with the Washington Commanders. And I think that he's going to consistently be involved. Didn't really get as many opportunities today as you would like, but every game he's given you a very consistent floor that is reliable. And I think that Ertz is somebody that you it doesn't hurt to go fall back on him in worst case scenarios. I would fade the guys like Taysom Hill. Again, he had a great game today, but Taysom Hill is only valuable in the DFS formats where you're just betting on one game, seeing how well he could do. Not somebody that you want to roster throughout a fantasy season. And then Blake Whiteheart for the Browns finished as a top 10 tight end because he had a touchdown, but he was only, I believe he was 1 for 13. It was 3 for 13 on 3 targets, but it's just, I need to see more than that. This spells volatility, especially when you don't have any targets the first 3 games. All right, guys, you could drop Evan Ingram. Time to go. I've already been saying that. Don't feel like you need to hold him because he's injured. Mike Gesicki, Hunter Henry, Brenton Strange. They had some good moments, but I think you got to move on. They're not putting together consistent strings of performances that you'd like to see. Buy candidates among the tight ends. Brock Bowers has struggled the last 2 weeks, but I do like him as somebody that you can have on your roster. I don't know what's happened with the target count today. I thought this would be a good opportunity for him to do better, but I do think that he's gonna he's gonna be a relied upon tight end throughout the season. I'm not really too worried how the last 2 weeks has gone. Good opportunity to buy him, especially on how the rest of these tight ends have been looking. Jake Ferguson is another very good sneaky buy candidate who could probably get for less than Bowers. And I think Ferguson is easily going to be a top 10 tight end. Much like Freiermuth, he's looking like the number 2 receiving option on that team. And then the Kincaid, Laporta, Mark Andrews crew. You have to still consider them as guys that you want to buy low on because of their name value. But I'm really concerned with Mark Andrews. The game with Buffalo is not finished, but he again only has had one target and no catches. And he's been terrible this fantasy season. You cannot drop him right now because of his pedigree and where you draft him. And he does have potential, but I mean, if you can't start him in week 5 right now based on how he's played the last 2 games, and if he has another performance like this against Cincinnati, you got to make some tough decisions, and maybe he does have to get cut. And then sell candidates, Dallas Goedert, great week 3, heading into his bye. Maybe somebody will want to take him on, but I don't know how much you can get. So as I said, he's a cut candidate as well. Cole Kmet, he had a great week 3, but the book on Cole Kmet is he's just totally inconsistent. He has some games like he did last week where he looks incredible. Everybody buys into him, and then he just falls apart. So good chance to take advantage of that with Cole Kmet. Sell him even off a bad week 4. Isaiah Likely still riding that week 1, not working out for him. And I don't think it's worth holding on to Likely just because of that 1 week and hoping that comes back. And then Kyle Pitts. And this is another guy that I've talked about multiple times, much like Mahomes, that it's just not somebody that you want on your roster. And you probably missed your opportunity to sell him in a trade. But talk about one of the most overrated fantasy football players in the last 5 years, just in terms of the hype, everything that we thought he would be. And you cannot rely on him as a tight end in fantasy football. Me personally, I would have no problem cutting Kyle Pitts and just letting that be a problem for somebody else. But I do think that if you own him, you do have to, the better move is to try to get some trade value for him, whatever that is. But yeah, he's somebody that even after this goose egg performance today, you're still trying to sell him. I do want to apologize about the Travis Kelce selling spree that I've been talking about. I was wrong in the fact that, with the Rashee Rice injury that's happened now, Travis Kelce is now an elite tight end in terms of the volume that he's going to be getting, because it seemed like Rashee Rice was kind of getting a lot of those mid-range targets that Kelce was getting because he was doing it more effectively. But now without Rice, they've got to go back to Kelce. And it sets up very well for him to be a involved tight end that should give you some good fantasy value. So hold him if you still have him. I think he will give you good value through this season. Defenses and kickers to look at for this week. My number 1 defense that you can get is the Denver Broncos. Playing very well the last 2 weeks. They're still very lightly rostered. Next week, they get the Las Vegas Raiders, which has not exactly been a world beater on offense. But what I especially like about this Denver Broncos team is that when you get to the playoffs, their matchups in week 15 and 16 are the Indianapolis Colts and the Los Angeles Chargers, which are limited offenses. So based on that, I think there is potential that this is a defense that you can get now and you can hold it through the season. So Denver, if they're out there, would be my number 1. They're currently only 5.4% rostered in ESPN leagues. Other defenses I really like, the Seattle Seahawks. They play the Giants next week, which may be without Malik Neighbors, which sounds to me like that would be a great fantasy defense to have for week 5. Miami is playing New England, which again is not a good offense. And then the Chicago Bears are playing the Carolina Panthers, which they've looked better, but I do like the Bears defense, and the Carolina Panthers have not exactly gone up against the defense like that yet with Andy Dalton. Kickers that I like for this upcoming week, and I'm just going to keep this very minimal, but as I mentioned, kickers like Chase McLaughlin are solid value because they're struggling to run the ball, and it sets them up in position to kick field goals. Same kind of thing with the Falcons, and executing in the red zone sets it well for Younghoe Koo to get involved, and he's got a leg, obviously, that will help him make some long kicks. But a dark horse sleeper to keep an eye on among the kicking position is Austin Seibert of the Washington Commanders. Again, we have to start looking at this Washington offense as being one of the better offenses in the NFL now that they have Jaden Daniels. And Austin Seibert, who did not play week 1, But over the last 3 weeks, he's been extremely effective as a kicker. 22 points against the Giants. He was 6 of 6 on field goals. He was 1 for 1 with 4 extra points and 9 points in week 3. And then this week, he made a field goal. He made 2 field goals. He made 2 extra points. So he's now in total, he's made all his kicks this season. He's had 22, 9, and 11 the past 3 weeks. So yeah, this guy is somebody that he's also highly available in ESPN leagues. He's currently only 5% rostered, and this could be a good kicker that you can have throughout the season that will keep you afloat. So again, there's always kickers available that you can find. You just have to make yourself available to pick one up at the last minute that can be effective for you, much like an Austin Seibert. So that's all I've got for this video. Please subscribe to my channel if you would like to see more fantasy football content, and reply to the comment that I will post in the bottom of this video if you would like to have your comment answered in the fan mailbag that I will do this Saturday. Also, just comment any questions you have about your roster and construction and questions you have. I'm happy to help you through it. And we'll see you guys next time. Hope you guys have a good week and a good rest of your week 4.